Oyez, oyez, oyez. Anyone having business before the King's Justice of the Superior Court of Justice, attend now and you shall be heard. Long live the King. The Honorable Justice Hennessy presiding. You may be seated.
Good morning. Our next witness is Chief King of Gull Bay. And I wonder if perhaps he can be introduce himself and be sworn in.
Miigwech.
Chief, would you like the trial feather?
Absolutely.
Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Wilfred King, Chief of Gull Bay First Nation, Wilfred King.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you to the court touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Good morning, Chief King.
Good morning.
I wonder if you could introduce yourself perhaps more formally. How would you introduce yourself?
Bonjour, Gima Ogima Nijnakas, Kiasa Ging Donji, Ogishkamin Nisi Mize no Tolem. Chimigwich Kinawea, Chimigwich Gima Kwe Tanji Kweda Midbin. My name is Chief Wilfred King from the Gull Bay First Nation. I'm from the Kingfisher and Burbot clan. I reside in both Thunder Bay and Gull Bay. And I wanted to say thanks for my fellow chief, Chief Tanji, who's sitting in the back, who's witnessing these proceedings today. I want to thank the Honorable Court, Justice Hennessy, the Crowns, our Defense Counsel, and everybody that's here today, our officer who's presiding in the back as well. I also, at this point in juncture, I would like to pay tribute and homage to former Chief Doug Sinaway of the White Sand First Nation, who brought this claim forward. And I also want to thank Mr. Harley Schachter when they both met in 1998 to bring this case forward on behalf of all of the Robinson Superior and subsequently the Robinson Huron bands. It's an honor to know that Chief Doug Sinaway, although he was Chief of White Sand First Nation, was a citizen of Gull Bay First Nation. So miigwech for that.
Thank you, Chief. Can we talk just in an introductory way about your personal and professional background? Wherever you'd like to start.
I am Chief of Gull Bay First Nation. I've been Chief since 2002. I've been elected, I believe, eight terms. I've lost one term and I was reelected to the position of Chief. And I've held that position for pretty close to 21 years.
And how about your formal education?
I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in political studies with a minor in law and politics, graduated from Lakehead University in 1993. I also have an honors Bachelor of Arts in political science, graduated from Lakehead University in 1996. And I also have a law degree from the University of Ottawa, graduated in the common law program in 2000.
And after you graduated from law school, what did you do?
I went and worked for some First Nations in terms of providing advice, political advice. And after that, I became Chief of Gull Bay.
So you said since 2002, so you were working for those First Nations governments between 2000 and 2002 then?
Yeah.
And which First Nations governments were those?
It would have been Bingway, Nyashi, Nishnabek, Gull Bay, Sandpoint First Nation, and also Poplar Point, Ojibwe First Nation.
And what was the nature of that work?
Providing strategic political advice.
Okay. And you had told us you reside in Gull Bay and Thunder Bay. Why in two locations?
Well, I bought my home in Thunder Bay before I became chief, and I kept the home, but I also live in Gull Bay. I have a residence in Gull Bay, a small apartment, and I do a lot of business in Thunder Bay. We have approximately 500 members who reside in Thunder Bay, And my work requires me to travel extensively to Thunder Bay and places like Toronto, Ottawa, and various other cities across Canada and towns such as,
Yeah,
slow down?
yes,
Okay,
slow down.
thank you.
And,
So
excuse me, can I ask the reporter for something? Thank you. Sorry about that.
So Chief, just to recap, you were telling us about, there are a number of members in Thunder Bay, a number of Gull Bay members in Thunder Bay, and you have business that takes you across the country.
yes, and
Chief.
we have members across Canada as well, as well as the United States.
And can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up?
I grew up in a small hamlet of Armstrong, Ontario, which is about an hour's drive north of Gull Bay.
And so just let's sort of situate that in terms of where is it in terms of Thunder Bay?
It's about 2.5 to 3 hours north of Thunder Bay.
Now, the White Sand Reserve, as it's now constituted, is next to Armstrong, Ontario. You're aware of that?
Yes, yes, I am. I was quite aware that the reserve was reconstituted in around 1980, 1981.
And you were residing there, I take it, with with your family?
Yes, I grew up there as a child in Armstrong.
And who was in your family? How many kids?
There was 9 children in the family, plus a mother and father.
And how is it that you, as a Gull Bay member, ended up at Armstrong, Ontario, next to White Sand?
My father was a World War II veteran, and at the time they were recruiting members of the Canadian Corps of Commissioners to do security service.
Slow down just a bit.
To do security service at the Armstrong Canadian Forces Air Base. It was a radar detection base, and that's where he was employed.
Okay. And I mean, obviously, you've got an impressive educational background. Is that something that your family thought important about? How did it come to be that you got an education?
It was a very difficult process, a very hard process, but it was instilled in me as a child by both parents, and especially my father. My father highly recommended that his children get a formal education.
And how long did you stay at Armstrong?
I stayed there till I was about 11 years old.
And what happened at 11 years old?
My parents separated, and then I moved to Thunder Bay.
With your mother?
Not at the time, with my aunt and uncle.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about what it was like growing up in Armstrong, Ontario for your first 11 years. Can you give us a flavor of what it was like?
Like I stated earlier, I come from very humble beginnings. We had no running water, no electricity. We had essentially a roof over our head and food on the table, but that was basically the extent of the amenities that we had. Growing up in Armstrong, because my father was fully employed, we probably did better than most of the First Nations people that resided in and around Armstrong.
Including White Sand people.
White Sand people, members from Gull Bay and other First Nation communities.
And how about recreational activities and going on vacations and things like that? What was that life like that in your early days?
We didn't have any. We just couldn't afford sports. That was one of the key things, is that you couldn't pay for organized sports. Very expensive. And in fact, the community itself didn't have much of those recreational services. And in terms of vacations, there was no vacations to obviously other parts of the world or even other parts of Canada. Our vacations consisted of going to Gull Bay, jumping on my uncle's boats and then going to an island called Jackfish Island. And that was the extent of our vacation with the family.
How about the non-Aboriginal population in Armstrong? How did they fare in comparison?
Oh, they were much better. They fared much better. They had all the amenities in life. They had running water, they had electricity, they had vehicles, they had good clothing. They could afford vacations. Basically, the people in Armstrong, and I'm not speaking demagogically here, but I would say that they were living in abject poverty, living in squalor.
That's referring to the Anishinaabe people.
Anishinaabe people, yes, from White Sand, Gull Bay, and other First Nation communities.
Now, did your parents speak Anishinaabe-Moan
Yes, they were both fluent in Anishinaabe-Moan.
and they passed that on to you?
A lot of it was passed on to me,
Okay.
yes.
And you mentioned that you would go to Gull Bay to your uncle. Living in Armstrong, did you keep contact with people in Gull Bay?
Absolutely. My mother, like I said, was from Gull Bay. She had sisters and her mother and father were living there. My father had first cousins living there, so we would make very frequent trips to Gull Bay.
And where was your father from? Was he originally from Gull Bay?
Yes, he's original Gull Bay band member as well.
Okay. And the court has heard in the last few days from a number of elders and witnesses about struggles growing up poor. How do the types of deprivations that these witnesses have already testified to, and I understand you were here to watch them.
Yes, I've listened to their testimonies, yes.
How does those types of deprivations compare to what you understand to be the circumstances of the Anishinaabe along the shores of Lake Nipigon?
It was pretty common throughout all of the First Nation communities. People were very poor. I witnessed it myself, I saw it myself, and I lived it.
One of the things that I think it was Elder Goodchild talked about was tar paper shacks. Did you see that as well?
Absolutely. There were two base enclaves on the outskirts of the town of Armstrong. One was known as East End and one was called West End. And a lot of those homes were essentially tar paper shacks. They used cardboard for insulation. They had wood stoves to cook on, and often they were just one room shacks. And they were literally tar paper shacks because they were covered with tar paper on the sides and on the roof. And I know one family, they had a dirt floor. They didn't even have a proper floor.
And
I'm
what
just going to manage this flow. If at least you would take a break between between answers and
Yeah.
new questions, and
Yeah,
then
I'm
I'll
sorry.
catch up. If that's all right.
So you were talking about tar paper shacks and a house that didn't have a floor.
Yep.
Can you tell us what years we're talking about here?
We're talking early 70s, 70, right up until I left Armstrong in 75.
Did you ask the indelicate question?
No. Let's just digress for a moment and ask you when you were born and what your age is.
Oh, sorry, born in
You don't have to apologize. I'm the one that didn't ask the question.
1964, and I'm 58 years old.
Okay. Okay, Chief King, I wanted to move to another topic and discuss some aspects of the RST Anishinaabe and the RST Treaty. But before we sort of get into asking you questions, I want you to explain to the court your knowledge base and how you learned about the treaty. Who did you learn about the treaty from?
I learned it from both my parents. As a child growing up, they often talked about the treaty, and both parents would talk about the treaty. I had relatives that talked about the treaty as well. Many of the elders also talked about the treaty.
And was this something that was Where did you talk to these people?
Just in the homes and visitations and that sort of thing. And often just sitting around the kitchen table talking about, politics and treaties, so forth.
And this is, how often did this happen?
It was quite, if I recall correctly, it was quite regularly. It seemed to be that the discussion of the treaty was often talked about.
Okay. And has being a chief for the last 20 years also helped inform your understanding of the treaty?
Absolutely, yes. I've taken the time and opportunity to learn more about the treaty as well.
And let's talk a little bit then about how you also understand Gull Bay. And then when I say Gull Bay, when I say Gull Bay, I mean the Gull Bay First Nation first, and we'll get to the reserve later. But let's talk about the Gull Bay First Nation.
The people of Gull Bay have occupied the territory since time immemorial.
And obviously the reserve came sometime later.
Yes, it did.
And after the treaty, what can you tell us about how long the Gull Bay Reserve has been there?
It's been, well, obviously it was one of the terms of the instrument that was negotiated in 1850, and a reserve was to be set aside for the said Indians of the Gull Bay band. It wasn't surveyed till about 36 years later, and it wasn't even surveyed properly at that time as well.
Okay. And the Gull Bay Reserve, where is it located?
It's on the western shores of Lake Nipigon.
And about 40 miles, you said, from White Sand.
40 miles from White Sand, yes.
Okay. And can you give us a flavor from your knowledge base that you've told us about and that history that was handed down to you orally about what life was like for Gull Bay members since the treaty was signed?
Well, the treaty was never fully implemented, and that's was always been a concern of the elders in the community, that they felt that the terms of the treaty were never fully implemented.
Was this widespread?
Very much so, yes.
Was it a
Was what widespread?
was the understanding that it wasn't implemented
Yes,
widespread?
yes, it was.
Thank you.
And what about the annuity augment? Now, we heard from Chief Tangi. I think she said that the only thing consistent about the treaty was that it wasn't implemented, or words to that effect. But I want to focus on the annuity augmentation. What about the annuity augmentation wasn't implemented?
Yes, that was a key factor. The understanding at the time was that there was
sorry, let me stop you. You say the understanding at the time.
in
What time are you
1850,
referring
when the treaty was signed, there was supposed to be a sharing of the resources of the territory.
Can you elaborate when you say a sharing of the resources? How would that translate to money from the resources?
Well, it would be commensurate with the value of the land in question. So if land was to be exchanged, that the value of that land would commensurate what we were giving up.
And in your community, in your discussions and your teachings from the elders and the community members, what was the feeling about the fact that there was no sharing of the wealth with the Anishinaabe?
People were very disappointed because that wasn't their understanding of the original agreement with the Crown. They knew that there was supposed to be a sharing of the resource, and we didn't get it.
I wonder if I could turn Chief King to Anishinaabe culture, because we have the judgment that identifies certain cultural aspects that help inform an understanding of the treaty. So let's talk about your sources of knowledge about Anishinaabe culture first. How did you come to understand Anishinaabe culture?
I am the living embodiment of Anishinaabe culture.
And do you practice it as well?
Yes, I do. Our way of life is inextricably linked to the land, the language, the traditions, the ceremonies.
And the sources that, when you say you live it, obviously you must have grown up with it, obviously.
For the most part, yes. Like I said, I live extensively with the land, in connection to the land. And our community speaks very fluent in Anishinaabe-Moan. A lot of our members still speak the language.
So let's talk about some of the core principles that the courts have said are important here. And the first one I want to talk about is kinship. Tell me about kinship relationship of fathers and children.
It's very important in Anishinaabe families, especially the nuclear family where you have.
Slow down just a bit, please.
It's very important to have kinship relationships in Anishinaabe families. The father and children relationship is very important.
And how does the kinship relationship, how is trade involved with kinship?
Well, trade would be involved, would be that was a very important component of Aboriginal First Nation Anishinaabe culture, would be to trade in gifts and exchange in gifts.
And when trade was done, would it be, what kind of protocols would be used, if any?
Well, it would be basically it would be obviously based on the principle of reciprocity, that you would give something in exchange for something, and often sometimes that gift giving could be 100% of the value.
Okay, so we'll deal with reciprocity in a moment, but I want to stick with kinship for a moment.
Yeah.
How in a kinship relationship does a father look after their children?
It's very important. The father is, giving, kind, protecting, benevolent, and it's important that that you look after your children. It's a basic tenet of our culture, is to look after your children.
We heard Chief Tangi speak very eloquently yesterday about looking after the future generations. How does kinship and factor into that? And what I understand kinship is looking at a father-parent relationship is one generation, but how does that translate into more generations?
Well, you always look at the seventh generation. That's always been a core principle in our philosophy, is to look at 7 generations ahead. And that was really critical, that you would look after your children, your grandchildren, and look forward towards the 7th generation as well.
And what would parents want for their children?
They'd want the very best for their children.
Sticking with kinship for a moment, children grow up. And in Anishinaabe culture, children grow up. And so I have a few questions about growing up. I don't know if you had seen it or whether you were watching online, but Dr. Dribbin, an ethnohistorian in this case, opined that within a generation or so, the Anishinaabe would become equal partners in resource development, and within a generation, they would be able to look after, or could look after, their own monies from the annuity, from the collective annuity. Now, based on your understanding of kinship, what do you say about that opinion?
I would agree with it. We have to recognize that at the time the treaties were signed, the Anishinaabe were a very powerful, mighty military force. We signed the treaties in our own right with the British Crown. We were a sovereign nation at the time when we signed the treaty, and we knew the importance of education, and it would take some time for our people to become educated and to look after our own affairs as the times were we're moving forward and with modernity.
I wonder if you could comment on the idea of being equal partners in resource development, and you had talked about being a nation. How do you marry, or how is being a nation relevant, if at all, with equal partners in resource development?
You would have to have there would have to be equality in that relationship, and that's so important, is to have the equality between the Crown and the First Nations.
And why is that?
It's important because you would have to implement the agreement that you signed with the British Crown, and if you're not at an equal playing field or equal status, then one is at a disadvantage.
Let's turn to reciprocity for a moment. You've already said that reciprocity is in exchange commensurate in value. What we've heard from other witnesses, that the Anishinaabe obviously gave up their most valuable asset, which is access to the land. How would understanding reciprocity and kinship, how would a father share with their children?
A father would share with their children as much as they possibly can. And in relation to the treaty, the father and children relationship was akin to the Crown being the father and the Anishinaabe being the children. We thought of it as that they would look after our interests, our best interests, and they would give much like a father would. It could be up to 100% of that exchange if they could.
Turning then to Minnow-Bemadzwen, we've heard a lot in this trial about Minnow-Bemadzwen. And what does Minnow-Bemadzwen mean?
Means the good life.
And what would you say is the goal of Minnow-Bemadzwen, of the good life?
The best possible thriving life.
I want to unpack. You've used the best possible thriving life is the word you just used. Can you elaborate on what you mean by the best possible life?
It would mean the very least of what other Canadians enjoy. At the very least, it's not basics. It's not just getting by. It's thriving. It's the best you can get for your people. And that's what reaching Minnow-Bemadzwen is. It's more than just mere existence. It's more than just a moderate livelihood. It's the best possible life, and that would in relation to healthcare, medical care, education, all the things that other Canadians get to enjoy. That would be reaching Minnow-Bemadzwen.
How about life expectancy?
Yes, life expectancy as well.
How about future for one's children and grandchildren?
Yes, that would be the investment that you would look at. You would want the best for your children and your grandchildren. And it's important also that it's also wants, and needs. There's a difference between the two.
So let's explain that. Let's explore that for a moment. It's also wants, not just needs. How do you know from year to year, generation to generation, what wants are appropriate for Minnow-Bemadzwen?
Well, as we listened to the testimony yesterday from the elder,
Elder Goodchild?
Elder Goodchild, yes. He talked about when he was at the dock in Rossport and where he had a homemade fishing rod. Meanwhile, other people, non-native people, had very nice, expensive powered boats. And he talked about that he would like to have that someday. And that's what I'm talking about is wants, is that everybody strives to have much better things in life. And I think it's there is nothing wrong with having the amenities of life and also some of the things that that are perhaps more than just mere existence.
So that you've relayed or connected the pursuit of the best possible life to what others see in what one sees out in the community. Let's talk a little bit about advances in the standard of living over time change. We all know that that's can be noticed, and there's no dispute about that. But how does the advancement in standard of living affect what is needed or appropriate to achieve Minno-Bemadzwen?
Well, the core of Minno-Bemadzwen does not change from the time of 1850 to today. The core principle is the same. We recognize that we are living in a modern society. We recognize also that we have wants, and we also recognize that it's important that we want the very, very best for our people.
Let's turn to another topic of what I'm going to call wealth accumulation.
Before you go there,
Yeah.
could I ask a question,
Yeah.
Chief? And I could have asked it of every other witness who preceded you this week, and I didn't for some reason. But when the questions are asked about Minno-Bemadzwen, it is the answers and the questions are often framed in the terms of physical or material things. So, there's also talk about healthcare and education, but I wonder, sir, if you would comment on the relationship between personal potential and Minno-Bemadzwen, if there is a connection. It's just that for me, whenever I hear about education, I link it to a word of fulfilling potential, but I don't know, and you can tell me if I've gone in the wrong direction, if there is some relationship between your understanding of Minno-Bemadzwen and achieving one's potential. It's not meant to be a leading question, but
No, it's a fair question, and I think if the witness is comfortable answering it, he should.
Yes, I think that there is a misnomer out there that Minno-Bemadzwen is basically just getting by, and that's not what it means. Yeah, it means all the things that you want in life as well, the best possible life. Education is obviously one of them. It's very important that in order to get a good quality education and to have Minno-Bemadzwen go hand in hand, I feel.
But let's try and maybe I can help direct the question. How does spirituality and let's stick with spirituality. Is there an element of personal spirituality in Minno-Bemadzwen?
Absolutely, yes, there is.
So that's a factor.
That's
it's not just physical.
Yeah.
Madam Justice, I don't know if that answers your question.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I had just before the questioning from the court, I'd wanted to talk about wealth accumulation. And some authors have written that Anishinaabe are not wealth accumulators. And I wanted to discuss that with you from the Anishinaabe perspective, both looking at it from individuals and from a collective. So what can you tell us about wealth accumulation by individuals within an Anishinaabe society?
That's a misnomer that there was no wealth accumulation. In fact, there was wealth accumulation of individuals in an Anishinaabe society. Many individuals had acquired wealth individually.
And so what would they do with that wealth? What would happen?
That wealth, once they accumulated that wealth, they would redistribute it to the Anishinaabe community.
So they get the wealth, then they distribute it, then they don't have excess wealth.
What they would do is they would have surplus wealth, and they would often trade that surplus to within the community, Anishinaabe community, and to other First Nations. But eventually they would redistribute their own wealth, and then the whole community would become wealthy.
All right, so that's how wealth accumulation gets shared amongst the community members. But let's talk about and sort of the concept of wealth accumulation by the greater nation or the greater the collective, if we can. Can you talk about that?
I can give you an example when it comes to wealth, and that would be in the resource of hunting. For
Okay.
example, the Anishinaabe did not hunt cow moose in the wintertime. And the reason for that would be that the cow moose would be pregnant and would be carrying sometimes even up to 4 calf moose. So the gestation period is roughly 9 months. And in the springtime, instead of having 1 moose, you would have potentially up to 4 or 5 moose. And that's an example of that type of investment.
So there's an investment in your lands and resources.
Yes.
So that's a 400% return over 9 months. That's pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good.
Okay. How about other examples of, you called it investing or planning for the future, accumulating for the future. Give me another example. if you
Another
can.
example would be our medicines. Weecamp, for example, is a special root we use for all sorts of ailments. And that we'd never overpicked. We wanted to make sure it replenished itself and so forth. And there are other examples as well in terms of accumulation of that wealth. I just used it too, such as hunting and the picking of medicines and so forth.
So maybe I can ask a non-leading question. Is there anything else you want to tell the court about wealth accumulation and Anishinaabe culture that could help inform the court's deliberations?
Yeah, in terms of wealth accumulation, again, Anishinaabe people knew that the land was very wealthy. They knew that because of their use and occupation of the land and territory, they knew the land had enormous wealth.
What time period are you talking about when you say that?
What time it would be since time immemorial,
Okay. And including today?
even today, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Let's turn to treaty implementation. And we're near the end of my questions. Has the Crown, either Ontario or Canada, reached out to Gull Bay to discuss implementing the treaty?
Not at all.
Ever?
Not at all.
The Court of Appeal, in their judgment, and I think you have a copy of the judgment in front of you, and it's in, I've just got it, I'm looking at it, it's in Exhibit J, which was the compendium for Dr. Driven. And at page 6 of that compendium, and there's paragraph 2B, as in Bob, of the Court of Appeal amended judgment. And it says, the treaty reflects the parties' common intention that their agreement was to allow both the Anishinaabe and the Crown to realize the future opportunities and potential of the treaty territory in a manner consistent with the Anishinaabe principles of respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and renewal, and the intention of the Crown to act honorably with justice or fairness and with liberality or benevolence. My question for you, Chief, is that with that understanding, how does that inform the future implementation of this treaty? I'm not talking about past compensation. I'm talking about future implementation.
The Court of Appeal got it right. That was our understanding of the terms of the treaty. And I am really glad that the court had got it right.
So what happens in the future? How does, let's take, for example, the how that translates into deciding what resources to use? How does the future, what does the future look like?
We have to become an equal partner. We have to have equal say in the land, the territories, and the resources. We have to have a say, an equal say in terms of what land is to be utilized, how the resources are to be extracted and used, and how our community will benefit and manage those resources in the future.
And how about what the future looks like in terms of how the share payable to the Anishinaabe is to be calculated? How does that work?
Well, it would be realized when that part of the decision is fully implemented.
So a joint decision.
Joint decision, yes.
And how about in the future, deciding how, once the share for the Anishinaabe, whether it's 1% or 100%, whatever is decided, once that is decided upon, how in the future would it be determined how that, though the Anishinaabe share is used? Who gets to decide that?
It'll be the First Nations that'll decide that.
And what would they do with the money?
There was a lot of discussion that I heard yesterday that investments would be a key priority in that. And I feel that a lot of the First Nations have a very good understanding now of international commerce, understand the importance of investments and so forth.
Chief King, I wanted to thank you for your time and coming here today. I have no more questions for you. The court might, and my friends might have some questions for you.
Thank you.
Chief King, I have no questions for you, but I would like to thank you for sharing your testimony and your insights with us today. Miigwech.
Chief King, I just echo the exact same sentiment as Mr. Gover. Thank you for your time today and for your testimony. I have no questions on behalf of the Attorney General of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chief King.
Good morning.
So my name is David Rankin, and I represent Ontario in this matter. And I just have a handful of questions for you. When my friend Mr. Schachter was asking you some questions, you spoke about reciprocity. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And I believe you said that sometimes reciprocity in gift giving may mean returning 100% of the value of the original gift. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
So let me just confirm with you, reciprocity in gift giving does not necessarily mean that a return gift of 100% of the value would be returned, correct?
It could be as high as 100%. And when you're looking at the kinship relationship, like I stated earlier, that the father could give up to 100% to his children. And much like the Crown would, as the relationship is akin to the Crown giving 100%, could give 100% to the First Nations. But it's got to be something of value. It has to be something to commensurate with the value of the land that's been given in exchange. And it could be 100%, but it may not be 100%, but it's got to be something to commensurate with the value that you've been given up. It can't be a small token.
So the return gift, you say it could be 100%, but it also could be something less than 100%. It depends on the context.
It should commensurate with the value of the territory taken. We knew the territory was very valuable, full of riches.
And Chief King, just now you indicated that we knew, and
Well, everybody knew the land was valuable, the Crown and the First Nations.
and I think this goes without saying, but just to confirm it, you don't have personal knowledge of what historical actors in 1850 knew or understood, correct?
Historical actors.
Correct.
I've read history books. I've read various briefs. I've read the treaty. I've read the reports.
So your evidence is based on what you've read,
And what the elders' testimony, yes.
and the elder's testimony being the testimony yesterday.
Yes, today, and no, yeah, well, as I said today, that's the testimony, and also complemented by elders' testimony. I wasn't here for all of the elders' testimony. I came yesterday. I'm not sure what the other elders had spoke of, but my recollection is the recollection that was told to me by my elders, our people.
Thank you for your evidence,
Thank you.
Chief King. Those are all of my questions.
Thank you.
Miigwech.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief King. I am, as always, very grateful for the contribution made by representatives of the First Nations. And as Chief today, you have provided us again with the perspective that is so important to the plaintiffs to bring to this trial. And we're very grateful that for the respect that you have shown this process. Miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech.
I don't know if Chief King, you want to step down?
You can step down, sir, if you wish.
As far as I know, as of right now, that concludes the testimony we would be, the plaintiffs would be putting forward. I don't believe that Mr. Gover for the group of 7 has evidence, any additional evidence.
I confirm that we have none. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So there's the matter of reading in, which some questions and answers from the discovery, which I would, as I indicated yesterday, might take 15 minutes. I want to get it together over the next couple days and share it with my friends as soon as it's available, so that we could deal with that very quickly on Monday morning, and then we would close our case. Yeah, they have my friends have indicated that 15 minutes or so would not upset their schedule.
And I'll just confirm that the schedule that has been distributed is still contemplated by the Crowns. I think, who's going first?
Well,
I don't
we would
have-
be starting our evidence, but just to be clear, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Your Honor, that should not impact upon our timeline.
Yes, and also, but that you are ready to start on Monday.
Oh, yes, we are.
Very
Yes, Your
good.
Honor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And Mr. Rankin is out. Yes, sir.
Yes, Your Honor. I don't know if this was embedded within the question, but there is a revised schedule that the council are working on to
Okay.
accommodate the June 19th date. We've confirmed that our witness is available the following Monday, so we intend to get that.
And I was advised that the June 19th date should be the June 20th date,
The Tuesday.
the Tuesday. That was my error. So I don't know if you're moving around the schedule, if it's impacted by whether it's the 19th or 20th.
Yeah, so Your Honor, I believe it to be the case that the Wednesday of that week, so that I believe the 21st, if my math is correct, is also a non-sitting day, which would mean that we would have, I believe, 2 sitting days that week. And then I think we'll need to speak with our witness to ensure that Ms. Jones is available for a few more days. That's
Afterward.
Afterward, that's right, because she wasn't available before.
She's not available before. Okay.
So we'll circle up.
So whether you lose a Monday or a Tuesday, it may not make a difference.
I don't believe it would, Your Honor, is provided that we can get, the requisite dates the next week.
Okay.
to make them. So
Okay.
we'll,
And I'm sorry about that error.
Not at all, Your Honor. Yeah, so we'll get the information, we'll get the schedule to the court as soon as we can.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. Anything you need? No? All right. Thank you all. We will break now until Monday at 10. Is that right? Monday at 10. May you all have safe travels. And as someone who is very nervous about these things, and given what has just happened with the other trial in Sudbury going on right now, please stay healthy. There's a jury down with 4 COVID cases. Can we go off,
Yes, absolutely.
please?